Okay, looks like we're live. Welcome back to Mission Top, everyone, and thank you for being here. Mission Top is a place, it's a farmstead and ranch, it's a family, it's my family. My name is Gary Nuila, and it's also more than that. It is a place of ideas. It's people trying to play with, you could say, and live out a way of life and live out some ideas and then report back on how it's going. All these are different ways of seeing what Mission Top is. Today is a Monday, and I hope you've had a rejuvenating weekend. I know I have. Always good to have those kind of changes of pace, I guess you could say. And in a lot of ways, I see the cycle of the week as something like a psychotechnology. I mean, if you think about it, there's nothing that dictates that we have to have this cycle that we do. Obviously, it has roots in some of our core religious conceptions, but it works, right? We have 6 days, or you could even say it is 5 days of work. The way it's kind of played out in Western society today, you kind of have 5 days of straight work, 1 day that's something like recreation, and then you have this seventh day that is, in the usual Christian conception, it's the first day of the week, right? It's kind of the first formation, the first reestablishing of who you are and your identities and principles. So it's always good to go through that cycle. It's good to go through the cycle in the terms of a day. You see it's kind of the same thing in the cycle of a day, but the week also works out that way. So here I am, kind of right after that first day of formation and getting back to straight identities, and hopefully sometimes these Mondays may be some of the better days because of that. So this week you can see we are starting off by focusing on this new movie, On the Waterfront. And here's what I'm hoping to accomplish this week, a little bit different from the other weeks. We are going to talk specifically about this movie today, which I think is very relevant to the kinds of things that I've been talking, the main themes, that I've been talking about in these streams. But what I want to do this week is my efforts are going to go all in to actually getting this video essay done. So you are going to be able to hopefully be part of the process today. This is the rough draft. This is putting out the ideas, seeing if I can collect them all together and see your reaction to them, just see if I can get them out. But by the end of the week, this time I want it to be I put out an actual video on YouTube, which is the final video essay. And you know that I've done this a couple of times, but haven't yet put out those other essays, mostly, again, for the lack of time and just hasn't quite felt right on those other ones. And it's really these live streams have kind of consumed the time that otherwise would be doing that. And I find great value in these live streams in this kind of project, this 90-day project that was set out. So I've been focusing on that. But this week, I really do think this one is in the position to actually finish it out. And so I'm kind of making that commitment to you, if I will, because if you know me by now, you'll know that making these commitments in these ways gives me a lot greater push to actually get it done. So absent some, I come down with some terrible illness or something this week, by the end of the week, you should be able to see this actual one come out in its finished product. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So it will be, you can hopefully gain from having participated in the experience of making this one. And I think the optimal thing would be to, listen to this presentation today. Hopefully that gets you hyped up about the movie. You can go watch it if you haven't, or if you haven't for a while, because it's not a movie I would have expected most people to have right fresh in their minds. And then you can see what I actually put out about it and the way that I kind of bring together the actual clips from the movie, put some music to it, and see if you think it was done justice. And you can give me that feedback, which I'm always very welcome to. So let's dive into it. This is one of my favorite movies. Most of the movies I talk about are ones that have actually affected me deeply in some way. So On the Waterfront is one of those. And on the surface of this acclaimed movie, I think it even won maybe the best picture. On the surface, On the Waterfront is just a story about kind of one of these mob stories, stories about corruption and violence in this case, on the New Jersey waterfront. And so it's the story of a labor union and the corruption inside of a labor union. And you could even say that it's about, kind of American individuality emerging from somebody in one of these unions. But I think the film's deeper story, doesn't have to do with these things at all. The deeper story is definitely one of human growth and transformation. So on the waterfront, you get to watch someone make the transition from a lower to a higher stage of human development. And this another way that you could see this film is that it's about escaping the system, right? Which again, kind of, if you look at it from an American point of view, we're all about kind of bucking the system, sticking things to the man, that kind of thing. And it is about that. I mean, you can see it that way. And again, you could see it as about a film about radical individuality, right? But it's I think the better way to frame it is it's about operating within a system. So at the end of the day, this actually isn't a film about bucking the system. It is a film about operating within the system, but having transformed your place within the system to that of one of much greater sovereignty. Okay, and so at the end of the film, you'll see that the individual, the protagonist, he doesn't buck off the entire system, but what he does do is that he is able to achieve this transformation where he then achieves this sovereignty, but he continues to operate in the system from this position of sovereignty, even while he also operates amongst other sovereigns. So it's about this transformation to a greater state of being, but then being able to operate with other people. It's not about something where you transcend everybody else and move on to some other plane. It's about doing it in yourself and bringing it about in other people. So it's very powerful that way. And it's even about finding the ways to kind of transcend hierarchies, if you will. That's one way to look at it. Transcend that system, but then come right back into the system itself and be able to operate into it, where you recognize the things that are higher than you in the hierarchy and in the system. But at the same time, you're able to take care of the things below you in the hierarchy and the system. So pulling that into the things that we've been talking about for these last few weeks, hopefully you see how this relates to that. Then lastly, I think the thing that I want to introduce about this is that it's also a film about this agapic process that we've been talking about, that I hit, especially in the Coco film. This process that is very much bound up in kind of the core elements of Christianity. So this agapic process of love. Again, I don't like that word love, and I'd rather prefer this word agape, but of course they're related and translated into each other. So very much you're going to see that there's this process as this individual, the protagonist, transforms and grows as to his personhood. It's only through a process of others having kind of brought that about and acting as the catalyst in him to bring that about. And what's awesome to see in the film is that as he develops, the other people develop too. So as we've talked about, when you get into this process of progress, this process of agape love, then it's not only the person being, the person that's growing. Both anybody involved in the process must simultaneously grow at the same time. So that's also very cool to see played out in a story. And then finally, another way to frame it is to see how do you break out of a destructive state of being, because as we're going to see, the protagonist starts out in this very destructive kind of state of being that he's caught up in and many others are caught up in. And many of us in life, we start out in these states of being that, you are destructive. That you're stuck in a state where you're not making progress, other people's aren't. In fact, oftentimes there's spirals, downward in progress. And so how is it that you break out of those kind of cycles, individually and as a society, well, again, you get to watch somebody do it. And so I think stories, are much more helpful in being able to kind of learn those processes than are just somebody talking in a microphone, kind of talking philosophically and abstractly, kind of like I have been for the last 5 minutes. So it's really by kind of seeing what's happening in these stories, but then experiencing these stories, it's so much more powerful of a process to kind of bring that story element into it. And that's why I think most religions, etc., offer this great framework of stories in order to kind of further the principles and the patterns of meaning that lie within the stories. One thing I should give as a little caveat, I am using a different microphone today than I have been. I've had a little lapel one, and this one's kind of here external. So you'll have to let me know, those that have been listening for a while, which one you think works better, and I can go back to whichever one works best. And another thing I should say is there are a few things happening around me today here at Mission Top. You might hear noises and things like that. And so just know that there's some work going on around me, and again, that's the beauty of Mission Top. This isn't a place that's just a place of non-action. There's actually some work going on from others involved around me, like you can hear right now. So that's just the reality of things today, but that means that stuff is happening here at Mission Top. Okay, so that's my intro. Let's get into the synopsis of the actual story. And for those of you that have a harder time just talking in the abstract, because I've totally been talking in the abstract, here we can actually get into something that's a lot easier to listen to, which is a story. So in On the Waterfront, we start out, and the environment is, as the title says, on the waterfront, on this edge of where dry land and water meet. And there's a phrase from Jonathan Pageau I really like, which is the phrase "symbolism happens." And oftentimes, even something like this, like a title and where it's taken place, isn't just by happenstance. This has a meaning that you can find in it. And we've talked about how the feminine is oftentimes represented as waters and the ocean, and the masculine dry land. So I don't think it is just random at all that you have this here, that the story takes place right there kind of at the union of the two, because that is the union of those two things is what really drives the progression of the protagonist. Okay, so you have this environment on the waterfront in New Jersey. So right there you can actually see New York off the skyline of New York from the waterfront of New Jersey. And as you know, that's a big port area with shipments coming in from all over the world. And of course, they have to be unloaded. There's a big labor union operating here on the waterfront. And as part of this labor union, it operates only as, the way that it has prospered and operated is through a system of corruption in this labor union. And so that's kind of the framework, is that you've got this labor union, the local community is all participating in it. It is kind of the way of life and their primary community of what defines them. But ultimately, this labor union runs on a system of kickbacks, a system of kind of taking some of the spoils of what they unload and things like that. And you have this entrenched hierarchy within this labor union. And at the very top is a character named Johnny Friendly. And you got to love that name. You've got Johnny Friendly at the top of this labor union. He's the boss. He's in charge. He's worked his way up from the bottom, and he comes to play a very important part. Okay. One important thing to realize about this labor union is that it's and the way that people participate in it, and the way that like all the local men in the area work for this labor union, is that this is a very totalizing, and I'm even going to say feminine system. Again, it's don't see it as feminine in terms of like men and women. See it as feminine in the terms of categories of masculine and feminine. And one attribute of the feminine is a system, a total system of ultimately taking care of others, but kind of requiring their individuality in the process. So communism would be kind of the quintessential example of a totalizing feminine system, right? That's all about the grand collective, whereas Nazism is the quintessential example of a uber masculine system, where it's all about the identity of an individual that kind of defines the whole system. And of course, that was Hitler standing there as the focus of the entire society and everybody trying to identify themselves through him. It's the opposite with the communistic system, where you're subsuming everybody into a grand collective. And so this system, this labor union, was operating very much more as a feminine communistic kind of system. And in this, you do have, as in any world or anything, there are masculine elements within that. For example, this is an honor group and an honor system in this labor union. And so to be part of it gives you honor. And we've talked about this with manhood, that honor is important to men, and to be part of a group or a gang brings you an identity of honor, just to be part of that. So that's the horizontal honor. But then also within the system itself, there is vertical honor, and that is the process of being able to rise up in the group. And how do you rise up? By doing things for the good of the collective, you could say, and keeping the system going. So it very much has that. Another way of seeing this labor union is that it is a grand group of lost boys, essentially. It's this gang of men, well, I'm going to say gang of males, I guess you could say, taking care of each other, taking care of their basic needs. But the rules of the game with this basic gang seems to be you can never leave, all right, and you can never grow up. You can never become a full person, a full individual. Instead, you can kind of suck at the teat of the system forever, and it will take care of you forever, but you must never grow up within it, okay? So any threat to the system itself in this labor union, anything that threatens to expose the corruption of it, is seen as the ultimate bad thing in this story. So everybody knows there's corruption going on, and everybody knows that ultimately the system isn't particularly caring about them. So for example, the labor members, they have to actually give money into the union just to be able to work, right? They have to kind of give the labor bosses, in addition to their labor dues, some extra money just so they get chosen each day to actually unload the products off of the ships, okay? Because it's all about keeping the system going. It's not about the individuals within the system, right? So, people know in this area that there is corruption going on and crime, so that's being investigated by a crime commission, the law enforcement of the area. But when they try to actually bring any cases and things like that, everybody in the system, in this whole labor union, plays D&D, they say, deaf and dumb. And anybody who talks to the authorities, who threatens to bring down, this system, is labeled off as a canary or a pigeon, okay, and or a rat. So they're the people that tell on these, and it's interesting, these dynamics, because you see how things like this work in the world today. That there are systems out there that ultimately don't work particularly for the individual benefit of the people in the system. And yet, if anybody tries to threaten the system, everybody looks down on it, because everybody, in essence, depends on the system. So I'm taking some time to really lay this framework of the groundwork of this story, because it's from it's ultimately the protagonist's escape from this, and his development to be able to escape from that is kind of his development from a child into a man. Because you can see that everybody that's dependent on this system, we've talked about that with manhood, how a dependence is always puts you into a mother-child relationship to whatever you're dependent on. And ultimately, manhood has always been tied up with being able to achieve a self-reliance and independence. And so if this is the basic framework that you find in the story, then we're going to see our hero must develop that independence in order to achieve that status of manhood out of it. Okay? So right at the beginning of the story, there is an individual in the community, an individual named Joey, who has been threatening to kind of rat out the crime going on in this system. and everybody knew it, and everybody knew that this guy Joey was a good kid, one of the best kids in the neighborhood. But of course, the labor bosses got ear that he was about to do that, and so the story begins with them sending some henchmen, some members of the union, to go lean on him, right? To go lean on Joey and convince him not to talk to the authorities. So that's where we have our protagonist brought in. His name is Terry, and this is the guy that's in the thumbnail right here, played by Marlon Brando. Great character, great acting. If any of you know Marlon Brando, he definitely has his moments where he gets the job done. Great charisma, etc. So very good portrayal of this character. So right there at the beginning of the movie, Terry's sent to get basically Joey to come out of his house, because Joey's kind of laying low because he knows that the bosses have it out for him. So Terry comes and he has a pigeon, because Terry and him, they're both interested in homing pigeons, and they have coops of pigeons up on the top of their buildings. And so Terry tells, he starts yelling, "Joey Doyle, Joey Doyle," and the guy, Joey, comes to comes to the window, and Terry tells him he's got one of his pigeons that he found to go up to the roof. Joey goes up to the roof, and Terry, leaves at that point, thinking that the henchmen are going to be up there and just lean on him, rough him up a bit, get him not to testify. But instead, what happens is that Joey, gets thrown over the edge of the building. Okay, and Terry hears him yelling, in the distance, and so this is the catalyzing event of the whole movie. And so one thing to notice in the movie itself when you watch it is that Terry, right before this, had released a pigeon up into the air, because again he had one of Joey's pigeons, and you can see right there that kind of that's the signal, I guess you say, the symbol that this is something that's going to put this whole thing into motion. And it's a bird, flying up into the heavens. Heavens is usually tied into the masculine, birds with that same thing. So you've got this kind of thing that something's going to awaken right here in Terry, and that is what happens. Okay. So Terry immediately, he's surrounded by the other henchmen, and you can see he's troubled. He thought this guy was just going to be roughed up a bit, but instead they have killed him, and something awakens in Terry in that moment. Even though while he's got to maintain his toughness with the other members of the union, the other henchmen there, you can tell that he's troubled about it. Okay, at the same time here, kind of a key important event is that Joey's body is there on the ground. People come to see it, and as usual, everybody kind of says, yeah, Joey had it coming for testifying about these, for being about to be a pigeon, a squealer, a rat, about this whole system, and we all knew that this was going to happen. But his sister, her name, the stream got disconnected. So 1 second here. Okay, let's see. I've got back that we are on. So apologize. It seemed like maybe the stream got disconnected. And I think we are back again. And once again, apologize that this happens from time to time here. We're in this rural area where the connection isn't the best. So my apologies. Looks like we were off there for just a second. So what I was getting at is that this character, this feminine character, Edie, she is the one that kind of opens up the space for the entire story to happen. And so right there in this moment, Edie, just to back up, make sure that we covered it, she's the one that insists that everybody do something about this outrage with her brother Joey. And she's going to be the one that gets people to act, opens up the space for them to act throughout the movie. And here's one reason I love this movie is because we see this boy becoming a man in it, but we also have this character, Edie, who at every stage of acting, or at every stage of the story, she's actually getting things to happen, but in a feminine way, right? She's not beating anybody up. She's not some muscular character. She's not the CEO of a company. And yet, without this character, Edie, none of the story would happen. So it shows a feminine character, a woman acting feminine, and yet, in fundamental ways, changing the world, exerting influence on the world. So I love the character of Edie, and ultimately, Edie and the hero are going to be, have to come together in order to kind of reach that next stage of development. So again, I'm taking a lot of time on these beginning elements, but it's only because they frame the entire rest of the meaning of the story. Okay? So what we get to is that we then go back to Terry. He's with the other henchmen and whatnot, talking about it, and they can tell that he's troubled. And out comes that, Terry he's a bit disappointed that Joey died. He was his friend. And basically what he's told by Johnny Friendly is just kind of reiterated, hey, you don't get it. It's all about the system. This would have taken us down. We worked really hard to make this system. It takes care of people. How about you? You don't have to work for the next few days. You'll be able to just sit there in the boat as it's being unloaded and get benefits. So again, there's no room for conscience in this, no room for individuality, no room for those kinds of forces. You're just expected to serve the system, be quiet, suppress your individuality. So the next day, we see how the system actually works every day when all the boat workers come to start the day of work. And once again, Edie is there, and she's now brought the priest with her, and now we're going to see how she's gotten things going that, things are really going to change and transform with this whole suppressive system because of her actions. Okay? And when they get there, Joey, if you remember, Joey is the character that's died at this point. His jacket is given to somebody that his jacket was getting old and decayed, this guy named Dugan. Dugan is now wearing Joey's jacket, and the guys are all talking there how, it was unfortunate with Joey, but we've all just got to stay quiet about all this stuff if we want to survive, if we want to preserve this system. Okay. In the process of that morning and how they kind of select people to work, again, like I said, even in selecting which members of the union get to work, they have to kind of give some money and kickbacks to the people in order to get selected. And in that process, with Edie and the priest now watching, they get to see kind of the utter pitiful nature of what's going on here. And again, this moves them to actually want to do something about it. So the priest right there starts organizing, saying that he's going to hold a meeting for anybody that's interested in kind of figuring out ways to ultimately defeat this system. So again, because of Edie's actions, now the priest, he's not sitting in in just the church anymore doing anything. He's out actually living out the principles of the religion itself. And at the same time, Terry, again, Marlon Brando, his story, he's getting pressured now by the crime commission, which is also showing up there at the docks, trying to find out people who know something about Joey and the death of these things. Okay, so Terry actually gets asked by the mob to go to this meeting that the priest is going to have, where the priest is trying to get people to organize and say, hey, let's stand up to this oppressive system, let's break you guys out of this. And Terry goes to that, and while he's there spying on the meeting, Johnny Friendly actually sends the henchmen to break up the meeting and kind of rough up anybody that had dared to go to this priest and this religious meeting to try to figure out how that everybody could get out of the system. And in that process, this other character, Dugan, who I was talking about, who got Joey's jacket, he's roughed up so much he decides he's going to talk at this point. So, again, the story is now moving that there is activity in the community such brought about by Edie, now by the church, by this religious influence, that people are going to start trying to shake off or improve this oppressive system. as these people are all fleeing, Terry actually helps Edie to get away because he has some sense of decency in him, even though he's caught up in this system as well, and he helps her to get away. And very much in the process of doing that, you can tell something is striking him about being with Edie. It's opening something up in him. We had that catalyst at the beginning of the story where the death of Joey got him, just opened up something, broke something in him, awakened something in him, and now Edie is very, very easily the next stage in that process. So once again, Edie got these other parts of the story moving, and now she's the next answer for Terry to get moving. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you how women can be the most motivating, moving force for a lot of men in order to call them to something higher, right? And that's exactly what happens between Terry and Edie. She doesn't know at this point that he's tied up in with this labor union and with the leadership of it, right? She just sees him as kind of a beastly figure, if you will, somebody who seems capable, seems interesting, and so that's why she's around. And that gets to, we've also talked about how the quintessential romance story for so many, from the feminine perspective, for so many women is the Beauty and the Beast story. And that's where you can see what Edie has in terms of the interest of this, why the feminine acts in the way that it does. You can tell she's captivated by this beast, by Terry, by this kind of this rough, unfinished character, that she sees some possibility that, maybe if I could get this guy to be a little bit less rough and a little bit less beastly, maybe he could amount to something. And there's something that, for some reason, women are very attracted to interacting with a guy who has that. But notice the prerequisite is always the capability that's there, the possibility that's there. You don't see women taking that kind of interest in scrub type characters, as we've called them, in incapable characters, guys that have no potential. And so, there's a message right there that if you want to be a beastly character that needs some refining, maybe all of us need some refining, right? All of us have our rough edges. But if you want women to actually take interest in you, then you've got to actually have some danger inside of you, some potentiality, right? Some ability to actually be, to have a force in the world, to get things done, as any kind of beastly character would, right? So that's a good thing to realize of why she takes interest in him when on the surface, he's a man-child, right? But yeah, he's a beastly man-child that maybe if she could tame him, could actually be quite useful, and that's the way to look at that. So Edie's father, and I forgot, he's another character in this. Edie's father, he works on the docks too. He knows Terry's reputation, and she's telling him, hey, you gotta leave this guy alone. He's no good. He's his brother, in fact, and this is another character to bring in. And I don't expect you to remember all these characters. That's not the key thing about this. But Terry's brother is actually right there, Johnny Friendly's right-hand man. And so he knows that this guy's dangerous. But Edie, you can tell, is fascinated, and he gets very mad that Edie has taken this interest in something that the father thinks isn't going to end up well. But Terry and Edie continue their attraction and relationship to each other, both of them seeing some sort of potential growth in their interaction with each other. And this is where, again, we start seeing this agapic process. So Edie comes off as a pretty impressive young woman in this story, but at the same time, she also needed, she's young, she certainly has potential of development in herself. And so, again, it's this wonderful thing of being able to see this agapic process, whereas she takes interest in kind of refining another individual, she's actually going to transform herself. So in one of the very next scenes, they're on a date. She agrees to go on a date with him, kind of reluctantly at first, because she's a little bit afraid of him too, and in the way that Terry, she can tell is rough and tough and not the greatest, he's not the perfect shining prince yet. But she does agree to go on a date with him. And as part of that date, for instance, he gets her to drink for the first time. She was a good Catholic girl, had gone off to the Catholic school, and he gets her to drink for the first time, which maybe some of you see as a bad thing. But on the other hand, you see that Edie herself has to kind of shed some of her just naive innocence, if you will. And you can kind of see this as a symbolic move where she is having to transform some bit of herself as she's taking an interest in helping Terry transform himself. And this is one of the parts of the film that I can't wait to kind of put in a little bit of the dialogue, a little bit of the scene, because it so much more will illustrate what's going on in the scene, where she kind of, they get talking about this, her brother's situation, and she kind of talks about how some of her ideals and the goodness that she sees lacking in the world, and she wants, very kind of sappy goodness. And Terry, you can tell on the surface, is just looking at her, and he has these great lines like, what a fruitcake you are, thinking that the world is actually good like that, thinking that, people actually take care of each other. Like, you don't know the real world. Down here, it's a world of dog eat dog, So slip it to the other guy before he slips it to you, kind of thing. So he's saying this, but you can see that at the same time, behind the scenes, this is where the acting is really good, that Terry himself is breaking down. He's saying, maybe Edie's got some points here. Maybe I want some of that, but it's going to take shedding this veneer of toughness, this veneer of reputation that I've got tied up into this system in order to do that. So fantastic scene right there. So as they're doing this, people start noticing that they're hanging out, including Johnny Friendly. And so very soon, Johnny Friendly's getting mad at Terry for hanging out with Edie, because he knows that Edie is the brother of this guy that just got killed. And if any of these murders and things like that actually come out, it threatens, again, the integrity of the whole system. And so he's mad at Terry for not doing his job of protecting, the system. And also gets mad because from this meeting, I said, where this one guy got roughed up, Dugan, the guy that got Joey's jacket, then they've learned that Dugan's going to spill his guts to the authorities. And so Dugan does spill his guts. And in the very next scene, we see that on the shores that day, there's an accident at the docks where Dugan gets all this stuff dropped on him and is killed. Okay. So that's another thing I like about this story, is that it's not a story, it's not kidding around with this story. As people are trying to grow and progress in their individuality, trying to break out from oppressive practices, it's not an easy process. People are dying here, It's not some, the kind of story that sometimes churches these days make about where, only good things happen to the people that are doing good, and in the end of the day, everything works out fine for everyone. You're going to see it's not like that at all. And that's one reason I love the complexity and the reality of this kind of story. It is not easy for a system or for an individual to transform into something higher, to reverse a process of a spiral down into a spiral up. So another person who tries to do this, boom, he's wiped out by the oppressive system. And in that moment, the priest does a great job at coming in and giving this speech that, it's centered around Christ, because this is a Catholic priest. But again, he's representing a category. He's representing a category of what the kind of spiritual or religious influence has in all of this process. And that's another reason I like this film, is because you've got the operation of the feminine going on there, but you have the operation of this institutional force. In this case, the Catholic Church and this father. But again, he's left the church now, and this becomes his church. He's standing by the dead body and giving this speech where he's saying, these stories that we tell about Christ and in the Bible and things like that, they're not just old stories or make-believe stories that happened in the past. These are patterns of meaning and reality that are taking place every day and that we're living out day to day. And so he's saying, so this guy that died in the way that he did, this was a crucifixion. This is Christ being crucified again. And so he's speaking to everybody and saying, so you are choosing what part you're going to play out in this story that is continuously playing itself out. Are you going to be the crucifiers, or are you going to be the one that embodies, that Christ-like spirit and actually lives out the positive patterns of the story? So it's a very good speech. All the while, the henchman, throwing stuff on this priest as he is kind of calling people to choose their place in the story, if you will. That we're all stuck inside of these stories of meaning, and it's not a matter of whether you're going to participate. You are participating in these greater stories that religions, frame so well. And so what's going to be your role in it? You have to play a role. What's going to be your role? And so that strikes Terry, and he realizes, okay, now Edie's opened up this space for him to act. This father, this religion and spiritual influence is operating him, and he decides to actually start to do something. And so at that point, he goes and confesses to this father that he's had this role in this whole thing. And the priest, Father Doyle, says, well, you've got to tell Edie as well. So they bring her, and it's another one of these kind of potent scenes where he starts to tell Edie that, yes, I am wrapped up in this system, but I had no idea that they were going to kill Joey, right? But as he's doing that, it's loud and these horns are blaring, and he can't get it out that he didn't mean to kill Joey. And so she runs off thinking that he has been wrapped up and he knew about that Joey was going to be killed and all this. So, add some nice drama and tension to the whole scene. But beyond that, now that Terry is confessing, everybody, this is a close-knit community where there's no secrets here. And so everybody knows that Terry is kind of moving towards betraying the system. And Johnny Friendly gets word. And so he sends Terry's brother, Charlie, to take him on a ride, to go to the game at the Madison Square Garden. But really the whole purpose of the thing is a setup so that Charlie, the older brother, has Terry in there. And really the whole purpose is to say, look, either you come back in line or you die right now, is effectively the states. And this is where you end up with, one of the best scenes in cinema where Charlie brings up some of Terry's past. And this is one thing I haven't told you about Terry yet that rides behind this whole thing. Terry used to be a champion boxer, okay? And everybody talks about it because now he's not this champion boxer. He's just a bum now, and people keep on calling him a bum. And so on this ride, as they're talking brother to brother in there, Charlie brings out how, you used, when you were 168 pounds or whatever, you were beautiful. You could have gone all the way. If your manager, it was your manager's fault. He just didn't bring you along too much. But that's where Marlon Brando, you've probably seen this scene before, even if you don't know it, has this scene and says, it wasn't him, Charlie, it was you. Because it comes out that what had gone on early in Terry's development, as he was rising as this boxer, as he was becoming somebody, was that the mob, the union bosses said, you know what? We want you to start losing because we're going to bet against you in these bets. You're going to lose. We're going to bet against you, and we're going to make money, and we'll give you a little kickback from the money. And they pressured him to do that. So even though Terry, then there was a culminating fight where it would have been either Terry's breaking out as an individual, as a star, as somebody that, as Terry said, I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody, right? And so if you ever heard those words, you'll know this scene. And he says, instead of a bum, because that's what I am, Charlie, and it was you that brought me down this thing and me that went along with it. And so it's just one of these awesome moments where you see like the pitifulness of a man-child that for one reason or another never actually got to become a man, that was stifled, or that chose, because Terry has a part in it too, that chose not to become a man. And so in that moment, it breaks Charlie down as well, and he sees, he's right. You could have been great, and I played a part in stifling you. And so at that moment, Charlie lets him go free. He doesn't decide to kill him or make him, devote things to the mob. But that brings about Johnny Friendly gets word of it, and so now Charlie dies. In the meantime, Terry goes and this is one thing I hope to be able to bring out in the essay, but he goes to Edie's house. Edie, remember, doesn't want to see him at this point, and he says, Edie, let me in, and Edie doesn't, and he breaks down her door and goes in and basically embraces her, even though she's fighting against him, hitting him. He embraces her, kisses her, and she breaks down, and it's clear that they still love each other. But the reason I hope to kind of bring that out is because it brings in this tension in romantic dynamics, and in today's kind of discussions. Well, kind of by the facts right there, he very easily could have been charged with raping her at that moment, right? By the kind of discussions going on in society today. And I hope to point out, yeah, by the facts, definitely. And you know what the determining factor would be, whether this was rape or not, is did she end up liking it, in essence? Did she end up welcoming it in the end, or did she end up regretting it? So, that's kind of beside the point of the whole theme of this thing, but maybe that's a whole nother video I should make, bringing in examples of things like movies, because it just shows the dangerous dynamics of sex and the way that, why we're having these discussions as to society, because, yeah, in this kind of moment of passion, he's acting aggressively and in a way that doesn't exactly respect her autonomy, you could say. There's no consent, there's no explicit consent in the ways that we're being required to today. But what of the fact if she actually likes that in the end, right? And that's the danger of it. That's why I probably wouldn't engage in any such behavior like that with a woman unless there was already some grand structure around us that kind of gave us some at least framework for our sexual relationship. And it turns out there is one. It's called marriage, right? Which is why I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that when you take out such grand structures that kind of give you a framework for a sexual relationship, then you're just left to the danger of people's perceptions and things outside of that. And so in this scene, very much it could be termed rape, but it would totally rely on whether she liked it or not, in essence. And so is that happening across the land today on college campuses and this? Yes. But see, the danger of it all, because if you're a guy that engages in behavior like that and she ends up not liking it, or maybe she likes it in the moment, but later, a week later, when the relationship isn't so great, she says, you know what? That guy, he didn't respect my autonomy. Then very easily, you could end up with, some people packing guns, knocking on your door, telling you to come with them, right? So it's a little bit of an aside, but I just use it as something to point out. It's just a really good example to point out the dangerous dynamics revolving around sex and why it shouldn't be treated so casually like we do in our society. Okay, so back to the actual story. So yes, now Terry and her have reconciled, but immediately they hear a call from outside of in the alleys. They're calling for Terry this time, and they're calling for Terry, Terry, come down, Terry, in the same way that Terry had called for Joey at the beginning of the movie. So, Edie knows what's coming. Hey, Terry, if you go down there, you know what comes next, because this is what happens to all the guys that are called down from their apartments to come out and face someone, that he's going to die. So Terry goes out there, and they do try to kill him. They're not successful, but he sees that they've killed his brother, Charlie. So Terry goes into revenge mode. He tries to get himself a gun, tries to go find Johnny Friendly. Can't find him, but luckily Father Doyle finds him first and says, Terry, you want to get your revenge? There's one way to do that. Get Johnny Friendly where it really hurts, And where does it really hurt? If you can take down his system, the thing that's providing him all the benefits. Because I think I pointed out before, but Johnny Friendly, he's the head, he's the masculine head of this totalizing feminine system. So you want to take him out, take out the system. So Terry finally breaks down, he agrees, and he testifies the next day to the authorities in a court setting. and reveals that, yes, this corruption's been going on, and I'm willing to testify about it, and I've got evidence, etc. So from a surface level, it's just one of these kind of stories, kind of courtroom dramas where somebody does the right thing and stands up against the system and brings it down. But what's cool is that you could end the movie right there, and it'd be like so many stories like this go. Again, somebody dares to kind of stand up courageously, fight the system, etc. But this movie turns right here from good into great because of what happens next. And that is that after Terry makes this, testifies against the labor union, everybody shuns him. Like everybody, right? Anybody who was even his friend, everybody except for, in essence, Edie and the priest, totally turned their back on Terry. Because you think about it, wait, wasn't he doing a good thing? Wasn't everybody being oppressed by this system? But you also have to think about it in the fact that, wait, Terry has just brought down, the mother, the sustenance of everybody. And he's also, from a masculine perspective, he has betrayed the honor group. Okay, so it's like he's betrayed, Peter Pan and the Lost Boys here. So yeah, maybe it was a system that had its faults and everything, but at least it was taking care of everybody, and everybody complained about it. But in essence, he has hurt everybody in his community by testifying to the authorities. And so immediately, everybody's turning their back on him, and Terry is distraught about this because, from somebody who wants to be a man, who wants to be an effective individual, to see that you are now been dishonored by your community, you haven't served them, that reaches deep inside of you. And so, again, it's so good that the movie didn't just end with that, with Terry kind of being the hero and him going off with Edie, to somewhere else to start a new life. But in fact, it's these last, 20 minutes of the movie that really are the part where he goes from being the boy to the man, because he has to figure out some way now to regain that honor in his community, to actually turn this into something that does benefit everyone. We've spent a lot of time focusing on manhood, that manhood, the essence of the actual institution of manhood, has to do with not just benefiting yourself, like Terry kind of was in this situation, but, in public, obvious ways, you must benefit your community, directly. And so up to this point, he had only taken something vital away from the community, kind of taken away the bottle, the teat, if you will, from this community. And yeah, they're ticked at him now, even the people that were his friends and comrades just a little bit before. Okay, so what does he do? Well, at that point, he goes back, and you could say, this is kind of the face the dragon of chaos moment. If this was a totalizing, feminine system, then he's going, and now he has to kind of face down the dragon of chaos and actually face down Johnny Friendly and his henchmen and everyone as, this lone person that decides to defy the system. And so he sticks it to Johnny Friendly in terms of words, and that leads to an altercation where he does start beating up Johnny Friendly. But of course the henchmen jump in and beat up Terry, even to the point where, he's near death at that moment. But what does he do in that moment? He shows everybody else. He opens up this space of possibility for everybody else in the union who's all watching, because it's all done in the public at the docks. And again, manhood's all about deeds in the public eye for everybody to watch. And so everybody sees that this oppressive head of the system, Johnny Friendly, is vulnerable, can be stood up to, etc. And this is the thing that kind of is the catalyzing event, just like happened to Terry at the beginning of the movie. This is the catalyzing event that you can see opens up that, kind of reverses the spiral, if you will. This, instead of being a spiral downward, reverses the spiral for everyone else now into this spiral upward, where there's this possibility of personhood in everybody else. And this way that, by casting off, essentially this system, well, maybe there's a way here we could all seek our personal benefit and also, but maintain the system as well. So the movie ends in a way that I really don't want to ruin for you, actually, for those of you that haven't seen it. So I'm not going to, but let's just say that, I've said enough here to say that this was this catalyzing event that turns it so that now out of this situation, Terry has, in a dynamic public way, he has benefited all the other members of the union by showing how they can preserve their personhood and develop in their personhood by standing up to friendly. But then there's this really dramatic culminating event after that I'm going to leave to you, because I don't want to kind of just frame it for you. I want you to experience it yourself. And that's where I'll add in one last element of this movie that bears worth mentioning, and that is the musical score. So this is backed up by Leonard Bernstein, who is definitely one of the United States' most foremost composers. Wrote West Side Story and that music. And so this whole movie has been backed up by the score, but you just got this score at this moment and this kind of culminating action. And so I will leave it to you to experience to yourself and not try to explain it or frame it to you for what happens next. So that is in essence the synopsis. And in the synopsis, I've tried to bring out most of the principles that I wanted to get from this movie, but now we can kind of wrap them up. I'm going to take a look at the chat real quick to see what you've been saying on this one, and then we'll wrap this up and kind of lay out what I hope to accomplish by putting together the actual video essay from this. So again, I'm always happy to see new and old, not old, but familiar names. So yeah, thanks for being here. Martin Lamp Vision, I think that's the first time I've seen yours, so thanks for being here on this. Always good to hear from Christian, and then Jonah, a good friend of myself and my boys from Utah. Glad that you could be on here. Yeah, like Christian. Gary, to motivate you, we promise we will all unsubscribe if you don't complete it. Okay, fair enough. Deal, right? Again, unless I get like hit by a car or dramatically ill, I've thrown my hat over the wall, if you will, that was the unclimbable wall, and now I either have to climb it or lose out on my favorite hat, right? So Jonah, I just want to tell you that these manhood discussions have actually saved me from my English essay assignment. Good. Well, hey, Jonah, like one thing I would do is, in any kind of English stuff, you're probably looking at stories and having to read books and stuff, and you can bring these in. I really give your teacher something to talk about by bringing in all these principles of manhood, because in almost any story, there's going to be these dynamics of masculine and feminine and all that. So hopefully this will help you to improve your abilities to make a dynamic point in your essays. So yeah, thanks for being here, Jonah. Okay. Ampulus Recovery. Thank you for being here. That's another new name, and glad you could be here and join us. Christian was remarking on that point about sex that I was talking about, and glad you appreciated that, even though it's kind of an aside from the general theme of what this is about. I think it would probably, I'm thinking of, should I address that in this essay? Probably not, because it doesn't really deal with the topic of this essay. But what I do maybe want to show is do another video essay at some point where I bring in, show scenes like this from past movies that by today's standards, would amount to rape. Straight, no question about it. By the facts, you could say, there's not enough consent there. There is something of a masculine force or dominance in these situations that isn't explicitly consented to, and show how this happens in movies all the time. And it's very difficult because you have to sort through, well, is that good? Is that bad? Is that, you kind of get both things happening. And again, I think it would be a great exploration in a video essay that was primarily just about that. I think that's probably the best way to address that thing. Martin says, sucks to live in a society where you get punished when you act masculine. Yeah, in a lot of ways there are. And that's, it is difficult because there are those punishments there. But at the same time, there's almost always an element of truth to the other side too. So like, for example, the sexual dynamic, I think even women want men to be able to act. Again, I've said there's a difference between ravishing and rape, right? And it's a small distinction that makes all the difference. And I think many women, if you just look at what they say about things, what they consume, what they read, what they talk about amongst each other and whatnot, you can find there's many women that want to be, ravished, for instance, but they certainly don't want to be raped in any final sense. And so, they have a point when there's all this discussion about the fact that, women are raped. Of course, that's bad. But then how do you preserve this other thing? It's complex, man, and so it's difficult when it comes to, being a man. You want to be masculine. You want to have a woman feel like again, we're putting it in kind of this potent dynamic of ravishing and rape, and maybe we should move to a different example because, it's so fraught. But it's just an example that illustrates the point. Some of these things are very difficult, and there's things on different sides, and that's why I think the best approach in the end is we have to get out this better understanding of the masculine and the feminine, so that people can, judiciously decide how to act, and then society in general will be more understanding, as you will, of these things, and not read them in the worst possible lights and whatnot. Anyway, difficult topics. Neil says, love your channel, found you through your warrior video. Yes, and glad you found that one. Again, it's been so long since I've actually finished one of these essays that if I can finish this one this week, as I've said that I would, then that would be a major accomplishment, because it's been years since I've actually finished one of these video essays again. And this movie, I'm excited to do it. You can tell I love it, and it very much wraps up, right, these major themes that we've been talking about here for the last several weeks. Martin brings up not necessarily in regards to that, because it plays out in so many other dynamics. I was just caught up in that in my mind because it was the one that we had in front of us. But there's so many ways, yes, in which society wants. On the one hand, you're getting all these messages from society of men, are supposed to be nice and kind, and I love this in the Liberty Valance movie, which is another one. I hope you've been able to watch since I brought it up, or you can in the future. It's not like I expect you to watch all these, but it has one of the characters, Jimmy Stewart, in that is kind of being way back in the 1950s or whatever when this movie was done. He was kind of being portrayed as the new man, and there's this potent scene where he has an apron on, and he's helping to serve, along with another woman, serve people in a restaurant, and they're kind of making fun of it, but he's also being portrayed as kind of the modern man. And so already starting there in the 50s, there's this notion that being a modern man, right, means being nice, being gentle, serving, changing diapers, helping out around the house, all these things. And again, there's an element of truth to that, right? Can anyone argue that a guy shouldn't be able to help out in those kind of ways and things? But like you bring out, there's also this thing where, Christ is a perfect example, because in the focus that's been made on Christ in so many religious traditions, it's been largely over the last several decades focusing on the fact that Christ is this gentle, it's Christ being surrounded with the children and holding a lamb and being this gentle, like you even see it in the effeminate kind of paintings and stuff that portray Christ that way. And you're like, wait a second, like, what about the rest of the story? Please put in the rest of the story where Christ is not nice, not gentle, very harsh, or at least very blunt, right? Cutting sometimes to those that are closest to him. Like I was even rereading the story where his parents go back to him when he was left at the temple, and they were upset with him, and he says he'd been about his father's business. And I was looking, there's no apology from Christ that he'd upset his parents or things like that in that instance. So there's all these pressures for men to soften and care and be more feminine, but at the same time, there's no recognition that there's a whole other side of the story, that you need the masculine to be aggressive, to be blunt, to do the things that need to be done and say the things that need to be said in certain situations. So yes, very good point. Now my son, it was it was my son that was in here making all the noise while we were doing this. Yeah, Christian brings up Christ, drove people out of the temple with the whip. We actually read that as a family this morning, because here we are in this Easter Holy Week, where, kind of like I was inferring with the religious character in this is the way I think religion should be lived out, that you find your way to live inside of a story, okay? And so if you know me by now, you'll know that I'm not even suggesting that there aren't several good stories to live within. My family's tradition is Christian, but the important thing is that you find a framework and an overall narrative of meaning by which that you can actually, by telling stories and then trying to live within the stories, have a framework that helps you make sense of the world and know how to act and whatnot. And I guess that returns us right back to the movie, because that's exactly what we're doing with this movie. And what I hope, even you in your own lives can do with movies, because again, stories are so potent for this. So let's just wrap up real quick what I wanted to pull out of this this story. And so we'll have it all here, and then hopefully through this week I get it polished. I think probably the max I would want this to be is about 20 minutes. And so you'll see how I blabbed for over an hour here today, but I need to get this down into a tighter package, which always illustrating things with visuals and scenes and music helps you to condense that. So the main points were that feminine opening of space and seeing how the feminine acts, to kind of counter this notion that the only way that women can be effective in the world is by being masculine. This is a great movie to show a woman, completely altering the story and driving the story, you can say it. Because of her, all these things happen, and she is acting in a completely feminine way, right? Not in an in-your-face way. She doesn't beat up a single person, no henchman gets beat up by Edie in this, with amazing martial arts and all those kinds of things. And yet, she influences the world tremendously. So, and you go back into stories and you see this is so often the case with Eve and with Mary and with so many other examples and other stories. Studio Ghibli films are great at this. I've said that before. Okay, the next, the role of institutional religion and kind of how it can fail and how it can be effective. So again, see that Edie got the religious aspect, the spiritual aspect moving, but that the spiritual aspect was most effective when it was out in the world, living out the story, rather than sitting in, pews and comfortable seats, just kind of getting people to raise their hands and say the right answers about spiritual or religious principles. Next was the nature of how there can be kind of masculine and feminine systems in the world. And so that was this labor union operating as this totalizing feminine system, very much like a communistic kind of system, but that how inevitably there's no escaping the masculine and the feminine in any kind of world. So even though this was a feminine system, you end up with this masculine alpha head of the feminine system. And you notice that that's what happened with communism too, right? Even in this collectivizing system, you end up with this, the head of the system, this upper class, you could say, in the terms of the people, still operating in very masculine ways, even though the system is feminine. So it's kind of, you see all these inevitabilities of masculine feminine dynamics. You're just hoping that it's not the dark side of masculine and feminine dynamics that are out there, instead of the productive and light side of things. So that was that. And then, of course, the main focus I wanted to make was this progression, this agapic process of transformation in Terry in the whole thing. So, and I wanted to hopefully point out these things that maybe anyone can apply to their own lives, because maybe you find that if you really think about yourself, you are a child or a man-child in some sense. And of course, all of us are in some sense. We all have more capacity to develop further. But maybe some people listening to this might realize that, man, I'm very much like Terry. I've got a man's body, but I'm stuck in a dependent system, whether that's my actual parents, that you're dependent to, whether it's maybe it is some sort of employment system or some gang of other guys, or gang or group or tribe of other guys that you're stuck in, but you see that the tribe or the gang isn't about the flourishing of the people in the actual gang or tribe, but it's more about the flourishing of more about the system, and so you realize that in many instances your progress gets diminished or is irrelevant, and so you can get treated poorly in order for the system to advance, and you see that with Terry. So in some ways we all find ourselves within this, and then you see the answer. The end goal with this is that you become an independent individual, you gain sovereignty over your life, but that doesn't necessarily mean you destroy systems and you cast them off. And that's where the ending of this film is so effective. Like, in the end of the day, the labor union will still exist. Terry will still be there in it, and it's not saying that he's now going to be Johnny Friendly of the next labor union. It's not. That's a possibility in the way this film ends, but it's not at all the way it has to end. It kind of leaves it open. And there's even some symbolism where it shows that Terry is already kind of, there's already somebody new, some new thing higher than Terry that he's going to have to fall in under, at the same time that now he's gained this sovereignty and invited it in others. And so I guess the point that I want to make in that is that, ultimately, I think that's what the ultimate society is like, is where every person gains these types of sovereignty that we've seen in the past. We're only given to the chiefs and the pharaohs and the kings and the gods. I fundamentally believe that everybody can gain that type of sovereignty over their life, but at the same time return back into regular society where there's always going to be hierarchies. There's always going to be something higher than you, always something lower than you, and you've got to submit to what's higher. You've got to serve what's lower than you, and that's how it works. But in this, I hope you see this process of transformation in Terry, where it required some kind of awakening event. And in all of us, those events will happen. If you think you're stuck in your progress and you want to progress, there will be things just in the regular course of life that will awaken something from you. It could be something as simple as a story that you encounter or some chance event in your life. And you have to be alert enough to say, this is calling me to something higher. And that's, again, with this release of the dove, or not the dove, the pigeon at the beginning of the movie. You can see that there's this catalyzing event, but also there's this need for the feminine to operate. So you can see this at several levels in this film. You can see it at the level of, a romantic relationship between a man and a woman. But if you see that all of us, we are also a world, and so within us, there's the feminine, right? And so it's going to be that feminine part of you that is going to kind of open up the possibilities, if you will, of seeing things differently, of kind of opening up, a new conception within you, a space to act. And you have to be willing to say, okay, I'm going to try to unify myself with that feminine in order to, because if you do that, even within yourself, what happens with the union of masculine and feminine? New life, right? New possibility is birthed. And within you, that's a new you, right? You're the new possibility. That's how you develop. And so you kind of have to see how everything within this story, it could be, happening out at one level, but it could be happening within you in another level, and it could be happening at the level of society in another way. I've been very much about this, trying to get us to think at these different levels of being and how these very same principles apply at whatever the level of being as, that needs to develop. You as an individual, do you need to develop? Does your family need to develop? Your community? It always works the same with these dynamics. And so with Terry, we saw the catalyzing event, the union with the feminine. I'm going to have to think a little bit more how to specify the next things that happen within him in order to develop as an individual. Certainly at the end of the day, there was that needing to kind of face the dragon of chaos, if you will, the resistance, you could say. I don't know if you've noticed, like my family certainly has lately, but anytime anybody tries to do something new that might have the possibility of new growth, new creation, right? It is amazing how the forces of the world, usually other people, usually sometimes even your very family, oftentimes, probably mostly, not mostly, but almost inevitably your own family, will not root for you in this new kind of creation or change or possibility. They'll in fact kind of be trying to drag you back, back into the system. You see that with this system, right? The very system itself, if you ever try to kind of transform it or see some new possibility, there's going to be this resisting function of people that kind of root for you to fail in it. So if you've ever tried to start a new business, if you've ever had any sort of notion of kind of not going the regular path of society or your family's path, or the different conceptions that the traditional conceptions people have, there's always going to be this resistance. Who the series of books, there's a series of books called Do the Work, or the War of Art, that Stephen Pressfield, I think that's his name, does a great job at kind of articulating this resistance. But you see that in this story, that in any process of transformation, you're going to face that resistance, and ultimately at the end of the day, you have to, you have to stand up to it. You have to slay it, if you will. That's one way of looking at it. You don't have to look at it as a fight necessarily. So that's a process. That's an integral process of this transformation. And I think there's probably at least a couple more, but I don't have them on the tip of my head. But at least when you watch this, you'll be able to pull it out. And by the time of the end of the week, hopefully I'll have the final package of what happened to Terry. What were the steps, In the end of the day, of course, you can't always articulate things out into steps, but at least try to make sure I've captured exactly what happened to Terry in that. And then finally, what I wanted us to see in this was this agapic process of transformation. The way that it wasn't only Terry that developed here, become greater. Edie did too, Along this way, she had to change herself, and certainly by her and Terry kind of unifying into a new thing, they both became something greater. But of course, the priest transformed through this whole thing, and then ultimately this whole labor union and all the people in it transformed. So when, humanity, we do this, we can either reinforce each other in spirals down in terms of progression, or we can reinforce each other in spirals up. And so that's very much the way we've got to start to think, how can we be in these agapic processes where we help each other, we transform each other along the way into something much better. And I think that today is all I have to say about that. So thank you for being here today. I'm going to take a last glimpse here at the chat. So if you have any other comments or questions you want to get in, please put them in here. As I've said, I'm always willing to stay in here as long as people want to talk about things. And so, but thank you for being here. Otherwise, if you don't if you need to go or don't want to be part of that, and I will just keep on going until you guys are done. So Christian said, what I like about Terry is that he has missed the boat on being a man in the past. He could have had class, but there's still the path for him to progress even after failure. Yeah, that's something, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something I didn't bring out even in my synopsis, is maybe that should have been brought out earlier on, and probably in this essay I should make it clear that, he had his chance in the past, and then everybody almost rubs it in his face along the way. They're kind of glad that he didn't come out. And so they'll tell him he's a washed up fighter. They'll say like, yeah, you used to be great, things, but there's kind of this satisfaction. It's one of the most horrible thing we do to each other in humanity, right? We take some pleasure in seeing people not measure up into what they could have been. Of course, we have the opposite in us too. We do like to see others succeed, but it's a very ugly thing, right? Especially when it's happening amongst your own friends or your own family or your own community, when you see people almost take some pleasure in the fact that you didn't break out, right? You didn't transform into something more. And so you see that in this movie. But even though he failed once, it doesn't mean it's ever over. You'll get these other chances. If you're paying attention, the catalyzing events, the chances to unify with the feminine will come. So yes, that is excellent. I think this is how this works. You guys kind of help me to see what's the most important progression of things. So that will change the way I kind of frame the essay. Christian, I also think it's a great turning point where he tells Edie the truth. Telling the truth in general seems very important to manhood. Yes, exactly. And you notice, no matter how you look at it, that was going to be a painful truth, right? It was going to affect her. The movie really plays it up and kind of makes it this kind of devastating thing. But even without the misunderstanding that's there in the movie, at that moment, it would have been hard anyway. And that's so much the case with the world. And again, you go to someone like Jesus Christ because there's so many rich examples of that, and you see that not always everything he said was taken, in some loving way by everybody that heard him. I'm sure even amongst the apostles, in the way he would chide them or rebuke them, it had to have stung in that moment, even though, of course they still followed him in the end. And of course there's others that he chides them, rebukes them, and they are, incensed about it. And so if we're looking for an ideal person has to ultimately speak truth. If it's error, like in the case of Terry, we have to admit error and stand up to that, even when it produces short-term wrongs in the world. But as we can probably know, when you align yourself with reality, you could say, yes, there always may be some short-term drawbacks, but there's always these long-term benefits because you don't have to keep on dealing with the complexity of trying to skew reality, right? Of trying to pretend that reality isn't the case. That makes your life it builds up the complexity of your life in ways that ultimately can bring you completely crashing down. And you see how that happens with just lies. The more you try to preserve lies, and probably just popped in my mind, the best example of that is the Chernobyl series. If any of you have watched that recently, if you haven't, highly recommend it. An HBO miniseries that kind of shows ultimately what happens when too many people try to preserve, to try to operate in the world without facing up to reality. So, excellent point. All right, Martin gives a compliment. Thank you, Martin. Yeah, that's very, thank you. That encourages me. So thank you for that, Martin. Rick Rye, only 12 people watching, but hats off to him teaching with so much passion. Yeah, I mean, again, 12 to me is incredible that people would want to kind of listen to this. So thank you for pointing that out. I realize, when you're comparing to YouTube gaming streamers that, I don't know, have 1 million people watching at once, this seems like so much nothing. But to me, I don't consider it nothing because the very fact that there's somebody real there, that's amazing to me, right? Somebody that's actually interested in this. And the nice thing is that, okay, we turn off these streams and then they're there still. And as you've seen with the other streams, people find them, people watch them. And these aren't even about these streams. These are about developing the ideas to put out in better format that people, like with my video essays, have proven to much more prefer the format of these video essays. So in the end, it's all about the ideas for me, and ultimately that anybody is benefited by them, you could say. So, 12 people, 14 people, 0 people, even if I was recording something with 0 people, but I knew that eventually somebody might watch it on YouTube, that's enough for me. So again, thank you for being here, and it definitely keeps me going on this to even know that, there's even anybody that finds some sort of benefit on it, that is plenty for me to keep me going on this. So thank you. Okay, I think that's it for today. As far as the rest of this week, I'm looking to wrap up this Understanding Manhood series. I think to like feel, I guess proud would be the best word. You know, I've never encountered a series on manhood that went as in depth as we have in kind of one wrap it up understanding of manhood kind of thing. So like that's something I feel really good about what was accomplished that, and we're going to wrap that up this week. And then again, I hope to put that into a more polished version so that here on YouTube, anybody who wants to understand manhood and have it be crystal clear by the end, because I think we're reaching some pretty crystal clear clarity on that. We'll be able to find that, and in ways that I don't think will rile up society, that turn things to a divisive version, kind of manhood, but in fact, the whole essence of manhood showing that, hey, this is a good thing for everyone, and I'm happy of how that has played out with that series. So we'll wrap that up because, on the other hand, you do get kind of tired of it after a while. So I'll be glad to wrap that up and move on to other things. So I'll be trying to get this video out with if things go very well this week, we'll probably break into this new series that I want to get into, which is understanding the nature of temples across humanity, and help people to see why temples have existed in every society and how they continue to exist, even if we don't call them temples. And that's going to be, I think, one of the funnest parts, is to kind of make people confront the fact of how they are worshiping at temples, even if they don't know it, even if they don't realize that something they don't think of as religious is completely religious, and they are out there worshiping regularly at a temple without even realizing it. So I think that's going to be very fun to get into, but hopefully very helpful, because temples are these languages, right? And it's a foreign language to a lot of people. So I hope to be able to kind of help us gain some fluency in the nature of temples and how they apply in a very practical level to our lives. So if we can get into the first kind of introductory episode of that, I will be very happy this week. And with that is it. Okay, so this is Gary, Nuila, signing off here from Mission Top. Thank you for being here. I'll be back here tomorrow at the same time.